Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. The whole town called him dangerous, and tonight I saw why. The saloon doors creaked open and every card game froze. Every glass stopped halfway to someone's lips. Dust clung to his boots, shadows hugging his tall frame like they feared letting go. His revolver glinted under the oil lamps, and his eyes, dark, tired, and sharp as broken glass, swept the room. Mothers pulled children closer, men shifted uneasily, and whispers rippled like wind through wheat. They said he'd killed 6 men without flinching. They said no woman lived long enough beside him. And yet, when his gaze caught mine across the crowded room, I didn't see the devil they spoke of. I saw something hollow, almost human, buried beneath the iron. My heart pounded like a drum against my ribs, but I couldn't look away. Everyone else bowed their heads, but I lifted mine. That single moment was enough to brand me different, enough to put me in his path, enough to tie my fate to a man who carried death on his hip and silence in his chest. "Stay away from him, Elise," I heard a woman hiss at my side. My name, broken like glass between her teeth, felt like a warning. But my eyes remained locked on him as he crossed the floor, his boots echoing slow, steady, merciless beats. He walked like a man who had nowhere to go but everywhere to be feared. The sheriff's badge glinted at the poker table, but even he leaned back, giving the outlaw space. No one dared breathe too loud. He stopped at the bar, motioned for whiskey, and drank it like water swallowed by fire. His jaw clenched with each swallow, as though the burn inside his chest needed something hotter than liquor to settle it. When he placed the glass down, the bartender's hands shook like autumn leaves. But then he turned to me, of all people, and in that glance, the saloon vanished. There was no smoke, no chatter, no trembling hands. Only those eyes, carrying the weight of something more dangerous than bullets. They were heavy with loss, heavy with something that whispered, "I've seen more graves than stars." And somehow, in that instant, I believed him. I should have looked away. I should have lowered my head like everyone else. But curiosity was a rope, and it pulled tighter with every second. I had heard the stories. How he once rode into Carson Bluff alone and rode out leaving 3 coffins behind. How he stared down bounty hunters without blinking. How he walked through fire when they tried to burn him out of hiding. Yet none of those stories spoke of the tired lines etched at the corner of his eyes, or the scar across his knuckle that looked less like violence and more like a memory he refused to let heal. He tipped his hat in my direction, a small gesture, almost forgotten by time. It was not a threat, nor a promise, just an acknowledgement. And in that silent nod, I felt the room lean against me, judging, whispering, "Foolish girl. Don't smile at the wolf." But something inside me did. Not with lips, not with words, but with the flicker of a gaze that said, "I see you, even if no one else does." And if anyone noticed, they pretended not to. The sheriff coughed, breaking the silence. "You ain't welcome here, Kael." His voice trembled, though he tried to mask it with authority. The outlaw Kael didn't bother replying. He just leaned on the bar, drumming his fingers against the wood. The sound was soft, almost lazy, but it carried more threat than a cocked rifle. A drunk at the corner table, braver than sense allowed, slammed his hand against the cards and shouted, "Run him out." The saloon air thickened instantly. Kael's hand hovered near his revolver, and I swear the whole room stopped breathing. I pressed my palms together, nails digging into skin, whispering prayers that even I doubted heaven could hear. Then, as sudden as lightning, Kael smiled. It wasn't warm, not even kind. It was the smile of a man who had nothing to lose, and that made it sharper than any blade. The drunk swallowed his courage back down, his chair screeching as he pulled away. And Kael turned once more toward me. The world narrowed to that stare, a question hidden behind it. Do you fear me, or do you see me? My throat went dry, but I didn't blink. Not once. When Kael finally pushed away from the bar, his boots dragging across wooden planks, I thought he'd leave like a storm passing over. But he didn't. He walked straight toward me. Every step was a countdown. Every beat of my heart a drum summoning something I couldn't name. People shifted, creating a path, their eyes glued to me as if I were about to be struck down. My body screamed to run, but my feet rooted into the floor. He stopped so close I could smell the leather of his coat, the gunpowder faint in its threads. His voice, low and steady, broke the silence. They tell stories about me, don't they? I swallowed, words trapped behind fear. He leaned closer, his shadow swallowing mine. What do you see? My lips parted, but no sound came. My chest trembled with the weight of an answer that might change everything. The room leaned in, desperate for me to shatter or flee. Instead, I whispered, barely more than breath. I see the man behind the guns. His jaw tightened. For a heartbeat, the world froze. And then, Kael reached for me. The moment his hand reached toward me, the room gasped like the town itself had been struck. But Kael didn't touch me. He only tipped his hat, turned, and vanished into the night, leaving the saloon heavy with silence. My heart thundered long after his shadow was gone. That night, lying in my small attic room above the baker's shop, I could still feel the heat of his stare. The town's whispers wouldn't leave me alone. They called him a murderer, a devil in leather, a man whose soul was blackened by every life he'd taken. But lying awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, I wondered, who made him that way? Who turned a boy into a shadow? The next morning, the whispers became warnings. The blacksmith spat near my feet. Don't you dare look at him again, Elise. You'll end up another grave marker. But his threat only made the questions burn hotter in my chest. I had seen something in Kael's eyes last night, something no one else dared to notice. And if it meant digging through every rumor, every lie, I would find out the truth about the man they swore was nothing but danger. Kael's story had been buried in dust and fear, but scraps of it drifted through town like tumbleweed. They said he once lived in Copper Creek, a quiet mining town tucked between the red cliffs. They said he had a wife, maybe even a child, before blood stained his name. But no one spoke the full tale, as though even words about him could summon bullets. My father, before he died, had told me once, "Never judge a man until you've looked him in the eye." That memory clung to me as stubbornly as the smell of flour in my hair. It was why I hadn't lowered my gaze when Kael entered the saloon. And now, I couldn't stop thinking about that hollow pain in his eyes. At the market, I pressed old Mrs. Dallow for truth. She crossed herself and muttered, "He lost everything. Don't ask how." Some say he killed his own brother. The words stung like cold iron, but still I couldn't believe them. A man who smiled at death didn't seem like one who killed for sport. He seemed like one who carried wounds too deep for skin to hide. And I had to know more. My chance came faster than I expected. 2 nights later, I heard the thud of boots outside the baker's shop after midnight. My heart leapt into my throat, but instead of bandits, I saw Kael, standing in the moonlight, his face carved in silver shadows. He leaned against the post, a cigarette glowing between his fingers, as though waiting for me. My breath caught. Every instinct screamed to bolt the door, but something else, something reckless, pulled me outside. The night air was cool, the dirt road silent, but for the soft hiss of his smoke. "You shouldn't be here," I whispered. He looked at me, eyes unreadable, and said, "Neither should you." His voice was lower than I imagined, carrying the weight of someone who had buried too many words. For a long moment, we stood there, strangers bound by silence. Then he flicked the cigarette into the dust. "They'll keep talking," he said, almost bitter. "But you looked at me different." My skin prickled. I wanted to ask about the rumors, about Copper Creek, about the graveyard of names tied to his past. But the question that tumbled out instead was, why? Kael's jaw tightened at my question. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled a small coin from his pocket and rolled it between scarred fingers. The coin glinted like it had survived fire. Finally he spoke. "Because you didn't flinch." His gaze pinned me, sharp and unyielding. Every soul I pass, they drop their eyes, pretend I ain't there. "But you," his breath hitched, almost like he wasn't used to explaining himself. "You saw me, and I don't know if that makes you brave or foolish." His words landed heavy, like a brand pressed to skin. Brave or foolish? I wasn't sure which one I wanted to be. I swallowed hard. Maybe I just don't believe the stories. At that, his lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Then you're the only one." A horse neighed down the street, shattering the fragile moment. Kael straightened, sliding the coin back into his coat. "Stay out of my shadow, Elise," he said. "It'll burn you alive." And with that, he melted into the dark, leaving me clutching my chest, torn between fear and the strange, reckless spark he left behind. Sleep abandoned me again that night, chased away by Kael's warning. "Stay out of my shadow." But I had already stepped into it, and now I couldn't turn back. By morning, the whole town buzzed with new gossip. They said Kael had been spotted riding east, toward the cliffs where Copper Creek lay in ruin. Some claimed he was hunting another bounty hunter. Others swore he returned to dig up the bones of his past. My heart knew one thing. If I wanted the truth, I'd have to follow. The baker's daughter wasn't supposed to wander beyond town. Girls like me were meant to stay behind windows, kneading dough and avoiding trouble. But I had never felt alive behind walls. I wanted to know why a man like Kael carried such silence, why his eyes spoke louder than guns. And though fear clawed at me, something deeper drove me forward. I packed bread, water, and the old locket my father gave me, then slipped away before sunrise. The horizon stretched wide and merciless, the desert waiting like a test I hadn't studied for. And somewhere in that wilderness rode the man they called dangerous, the man I intended to truly see. The desert was not made for soft hands or kind hearts. By noon, the sun pressed down like a hammer, the horizon trembling with waves of heat. My dress clung to my skin, dust clotted in my lashes, and the loaf of bread I packed was already hard as stone. Still I pressed on, my eyes searching the endless stretch of road. Kael's trail was easy to follow at first, hoofprints stamped deep into the dirt, a cigarette stub still smoldering near a cactus. But the farther I walked, the fainter the signs became, as though the land itself wanted to swallow him whole. Fear nipped at my heels with every step. What if the stories were true? What if I found not a man, but a monster? And yet, the memory of his eyes pulled me forward, whispering that there was more beneath his shadow. By dusk, my legs trembled and my throat burned dry, but at last I saw it, a fire glowing faint against the rocks. I froze, my breath caught between terror and relief. Kael was there, his broad frame hunched beside the flames, sharpening a knife that gleamed in the firelight. He hadn't seen me yet. I crouched behind a boulder, my heart slamming so loudly I feared he'd hear it. Kael moved with quiet precision, his knife sliding against a whetstone in slow, practiced arcs. Every flick of his wrist looked like ritual, something he'd done 1,000 times before. But then, without lifting his head, his voice cut through the silence. "You can come out now." My stomach dropped. Slowly, I stepped from behind the rock, my hands trembling though I forced them to stay open, harmless. Kael looked up, his eyes glinting gold in the firelight, but he didn't reach for his gun. Instead, he tilted his head, studying me the way one studies a storm cloud, measuring how much ruin it could bring. "You've got no business out here," he said. His tone wasn't angry, just tired, like he'd spoken the line too many times before. "You'll die faster than a candle in the wind." I swallowed hard. "Then I'll die knowing the truth," I whispered. His jaw tightened, and for a heartbeat, I thought he'd send me back. But instead, he tossed a second loaf of bread from his saddlebag toward me. "Sit," he muttered, "since you're already a fool." The bread was stale, but hunger made it sweet. I sat across from him, the fire snapping between us, painting shadows across his face. His eyes flickered with the flames, restless, haunted. "Why Copper Creek?" I asked softly. His hand stilled on the knife. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. "You've heard the stories," he said, voice low. "You tell me." I shook my head. "Stories aren't truth. Not the kind worth dying for." Something in him cracked at that, a shift so slight I nearly missed it. He leaned back, staring into the fire as if it held memories he couldn't bury. "Copper Creek was home once," he said finally. "Before greed burned it down. Before blood bought silence." His words carried a weight that pressed against my chest. I wanted to ask who he lost, what he carried, but his eyes warned me that some truths cut deeper than bullets. Still, just hearing him admit the town's name felt like breaking through stone to find a beating heart beneath. And though he gave me no details, I understood one thing clearly. Whatever happened in Copper Creek wasn't a tale of cruelty. It was a wound. The fire burned low, and Kael's shadow stretched long behind him. "Why do you care?" he asked suddenly, his gaze snapping to me, sharp as steel. The question pierced deeper than I expected. Why did I care? I could have stayed in town safe, with my life laid out before me. Kneading bread, marrying some farmer, fading into dust. But that life had always felt like a cage. And Kael, dangerous as he was the first crack in the bars. "Because I don't believe you're the man they say you are," I answered, my voice steady despite the tremor inside. His lips curved in a bitter half-smile. "Belief doesn't change bullets." He tossed the knife into the dirt, the blade sticking upright. "Anyone who stands near me ends up buried." His voice broke slightly at the last word, so soft I almost missed it. I leaned closer, my chest tightening. "Then maybe you need someone who won't run." His stare locked onto mine, fierce and searching, like he wanted to find the lie in my words. But there wasn't one. For the first time, I thought I saw surprise flicker across his hardened face, like he hadn't expected anyone to stay. The night deepened, coyotes howling in the distance, the desert air sharp with chill. Kael rose, dusting off his coat, and pulled the knife free from the dirt. He slipped it back into his belt, his movements calm but restless. "If you follow me past this point," he warned, "you're stepping into a graveyard of men braver than you." His words should have broken me. Instead, they lit something fierce in my chest. "Then let me decide how deep I'm willing to go," I whispered. He froze, his back to me, the firelight flickering against the lines of his jaw. Silence stretched heavy, as though the desert itself waited for his choice. Finally, he turned, his face shadowed, unreadable. "You're stubborn," he muttered. "It'll get you killed." He kicked dirt over the fire, plunging us into darkness, then swung into his saddle. "Keep up if you can." With that, he spurred his horse toward the cliffs, vanishing into the starlit expanse. I grabbed my locket, shoved it against my chest, and followed on foot, the night swallowing me whole. Somewhere ahead lay Copper Creek, and with it, the secrets of the man the world feared. I had chosen my path. The cliffs loomed by dawn, jagged spires cutting the horizon like broken teeth. My legs burned, every step a prayer to keep from collapsing, but Kael's horse carried him effortlessly ahead. He didn't look back once, yet I knew he heard me stumbling, gasping against the dry air. At last, he reined in near a canyon ridge, his silhouette sharp against the rising sun. "You'll drop dead before Copper Creek," he muttered. I leaned against a rock, my chest heaving. "Then I'll die closer to the truth." For a moment, I thought he might leave me there, abandoned in the desert like another forgotten soul. But instead, he dismounted, his coat whipping in the wind, and offered me a canteen. His hand brushed mine as I drank, rough and scarred but steady. That steadiness unsettled me more than his gun ever could. As I wiped my mouth, he studied me with something I couldn't name. Before I could ask, the sound of hooves echoed across the canyon. Kael stiffened, his body coiled like a rattlesnake ready to strike. From the ridge above, 3 riders appeared, rifles slung across their backs, eyes set on us like wolves who'd caught scent of prey. Kael's hand moved to his revolver, smooth, silent, deadly. His eyes narrowed as the riders descended, dust trailing their horses. "Bounty hunters," he muttered. My heart froze. The tallest of the 3 spat into the dirt as his horse came to a halt. "Kael Thorne," he drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. "Dead or alive, you're worth more than gold." His gaze slid to me, and a grin split his face. "And what do we have here?" A girl too foolish to know where her bed should be. Heat surged in my chest, fear and anger twisting together. Kael stepped forward, shielding me with his frame. "She ain't part of this," he said, his voice low, controlled. The bounty hunter chuckled. "Every outlaw says that. But I reckon she'll fetch a price too." My knees trembled, but I stood tall behind him. Kael's thumb brushed the hammer of his gun. The air snapped taut, like a rope stretched to breaking. The riders shifted, their hands sliding toward their rifles. For a breathless moment, I saw both futures. Kael walking away in chains, or Kael spilling blood to keep breathing. Neither ending felt like mercy. And then, the rope snapped. The first shot cracked the canyon open, echoing like thunder. Kael moved faster than I thought humanly possible. His revolver roared, fire flashing from the barrel, and one rider toppled from his horse before his rifle left its holster. The second swung his gun toward me, but Kael was already there, his body shielding mine as the bullet shattered stone above my head. He shoved me to the ground, his coat sweeping across my face, and fired again. The second rider fell, his scream swallowed by the canyon walls. Dust choked the air, horses shrieking in panic. The last man pulled a blade, charging on foot, his eyes wild with rage. Kael met him head-on, steel against steel, their knives clashing in a blur of sparks and gritted teeth. I scrambled back, stones cutting my palms, my heart pounding like war drums. The fight was raw, brutal. Kael's strength against the bounty hunter's fury. Finally, with a twist that left my stomach lurching, Kael drove the blade into the man's chest. Silence crashed down, broken only by the ragged sound of Kael's breath. His hands dripped red, his face unreadable as he pulled the knife free. The gun smoke lingered, sharp as judgment. I stared, my body frozen, my throat tight with horror. The stories had been true, or so it seemed. Kael stood among the bodies, his revolver still warm, his knife slick with blood. He didn't look like a man. He looked like death itself, walking on 2 legs. My chest heaved, torn between fear and the memory of his eyes by the fire. He wiped the blade on his coat, his movement steady, deliberate, almost detached. Then, slowly, his gaze found mine. For a heartbeat, I wanted to run, to flee the monster the town had warned me of. But when I looked closer, I didn't see a monster. I saw a man who hated every breath of what he just did. His jaw clenched, his eyes burned. But behind the fire was grief, grief so raw it cracked his armor. Kael slid the knife back into his belt and turned away, his voice rough as gravel. "Now you've seen it," he said. "This is who I am." My lips trembled, but the words escaped before I could stop them. "No, this is what the world made you." His shoulder stiffened. He didn't answer. He just mounted his horse, his silence heavier than the corpses left behind. We rode in silence, the canyon walls closing around us. Blood still clung to his hands, and yet, I couldn't shake the image of the pain in his eyes. The man they called dangerous wasn't made of steel. He was made of scars. The trail curved toward the cliffs, and Copper Creek's ruins lay somewhere ahead, waiting like an unspoken truth. My heart hammered with each hoofbeat, knowing that the path I had chosen was no longer curiosity, it was survival. If I stayed with Kael, I would carry his shadow. If I left, the hunters would find me just as easily as they found him. And still, fear wasn't what gnawed at me most. It was the way my chest ached when I looked at him. The way I wanted to reach through the blood and silence to the man buried underneath. As the sun dipped low, Kael finally spoke, his voice barely more than wind. If you keep walking beside me, Elise, you'll end up with dirt over your grave before your heart stops beating. I tightened my grip on the locket at my chest, whispering back, "Then let me choose how I'll be remembered." He glanced at me once, unreadable, before spurring his horse forward into the dusk. The ruins came into view at midday, a skeleton town cradled between red cliffs. Copper Creek was nothing but burned beams and hollow stone walls, the remains of a fire that must have licked every corner of it. Wind howled through the empty streets, carrying ashes that had outlived the people who once breathed here. I stopped at the edge of the ridge, my chest tightening. "This was your home," I whispered, though I hadn't meant to say it aloud. Kael rode past me without answering, his face unreadable, his shoulders squared as though the ghosts pressed down on them. He dismounted at the blackened shell of a church, tying his horse to the cracked post. I followed, each step sinking into a silence too heavy to belong to the living. In the center of town, a rusted sign lay crooked in the dirt. Copper Creek Mining Company. My stomach nodded. This wasn't just a fire. It was a burial ground. Kael crouched near the charred beams of what must have been a house. His hand brushed the soot gently, almost tenderly, like a man touching the cheek of someone long gone. His lips parted, but the words died in his throat. I knelt beside him, the air thick with smoke even years too late. "What happened here?" I asked softly. Kael didn't answer right away. His fingers dug into the ash, curling around nothing. Finally, his voice came, rough and low. "Greed happened. Men wanted more copper than the earth could give. They set fire to the mine to smoke me out. But the flames didn't stop there. They took everything." His hand trembled as he pulled a charred wooden toy from the rubble, its edges blackened but its shape still clear. A small horse. My breath caught. "You had—" I didn't finish. He nodded once, eyes fixed on the toy. "A son!" The words dropped like stones, breaking something inside me. My throat burned, but no tears came. Kael's jaw clenched, his silence heavier than a scream. "They told me it was my fault," he said finally. "That I'd drawn the fire, that I'd brought death by refusing to leave. So I killed them, every man who lit that flame. And still, it didn't bring him back." He dropped the toy into the ash. The wind carried it away, and I felt the weight of his loss like it had carved itself into me. The ruins pressed closer, each corner whispering of lives cut short. I touched Kael's arm gently, but he pulled away, rising to his feet. "This is why they call me dangerous," he said, his voice flat. "Because when I lost him, I stopped being a man. I became a reckoning." His words chilled me, but I didn't look away. "No," I said firmly. "You became a father who was broken. Anyone would have burned the world down for their child." He turned sharply, his eyes blazing. "And what did it change? He's still gone." His chest rose and fell, ragged, and for a moment I feared the storm inside him would break me too. But then his fire dimmed, leaving only exhaustion. He sank onto the steps of the ruined church, his head in his hands. The sight of him, this man the world feared, looking more like a mourner than a monster, stole my breath. "You're not what they say," I whispered. "You're just a man who's been left with nothing." His eyes lifted slowly, locking onto mine. There was no anger now, only pain, raw and bare. And I realized then, I wasn't afraid of him. I was afraid of losing him. The sound of footsteps snapped us from the silence. Kael shot to his feet, revolver drawn before I could blink. Shadows moved at the far end of the street, figures picking through the ruins like vultures. My chest tightened as 4 men emerged, their faces hard, rifles glinting in the sun. "More bounty hunters?" I whispered. Kael's jaw tightened. "No, worse." The men stopped, their leader spitting into the dirt. Well, Kael Thorne." His grin spread like rot. "Didn't expect to find you praying in the ashes." His eyes flicked to me, hungry, mocking. "And who's the girl? Another grave you're digging?" My stomach turned cold, but I forced my chin high. Kael stepped forward, his revolver steady, his stance like stone. "Leave her out of this." The leader chuckled, drawing his own gun. "Always the hero when it don't matter. But you know why we're here. The mine's still worth something, and you're standing in the way again." My blood ran cold. This wasn't just Kael's past. It was a war still burning. Kael's shoulders squared, his eyes narrowing like storm clouds gathering. "Then you'll burn with it," he growled. And for the first time, I saw not grief, but fire ready to rise again. The men spread out, rifles aimed. My breath caught as Kael shoved me behind a wall, the splinters scraping my skin. "Stay down," he hissed, his voice edged with iron. Gunfire cracked, splintering stone and wood, the air thick with smoke and fear. Kael moved like the shadows themselves, his revolver barking in sharp, merciless bursts. One man fell, another staggered, but the fight wasn't ending. It was only beginning. The leader shouted, "You can't outrun this, Thorne. You'll die with this town just like you should have years ago." Kael's teeth clenched, his eyes flashing with fury. The words cut deeper than bullets, and I knew they weren't just taunts. They were the truth he'd carried like a chain. My hands trembled, clutching the locket at my throat. For the first time, I realized that standing beside Kael wasn't just about discovering who he was. It was about stepping into the fire that had shaped him. The ruins of Copper Creek weren't silent anymore. They were screaming, and the past was clawing its way back with guns and blood. And in that chaos, one thought burned through my fear. I wasn't going to let him face it alone. Gunfire split the air, the sharp cracks bouncing between the hollow bones of Copper Creek. Smoke curled from shattered wood as Kael fired, his revolver spitting sparks like lightning tearing through a storm. I crouched behind the wall, heart hammering so violently I thought it might burst from my chest. The ruined church loomed above, its charred beams shaking with each bullet that slammed into it. Kael moved with lethal precision, reloading faster than I could blink, his body a blur of instinct. But for every shot he landed, the hunters pressed harder, bullets screaming past us. The leader's voice cut through the chaos. "This is where you end, Thorne. No more running, no more shadows. Your sins die here." Kael didn't answer. His jaw locked, his eyes blazing with fury as he returned fire. Splinters rained over me, stinging my arms, but fear wasn't my enemy anymore. It was uselessness. Sitting in the dirt, shaking, waiting, it gnawed at me. My father's words echoed in my skull. "Never judge a man until you've looked him in the eye." I had looked. I had seen. And I couldn't just hide while the only man brave enough to stand between me and death bled for me. The world narrowed to smoke, grit, and the pounding of my pulse. My fingers brushed the locket at my throat, the small weight grounding me. Kael ducked, a bullet grazing his shoulder, ripping fabric and skin. He hissed but didn't falter, firing back with unrelenting fury. My stomach lurched. He was strong, but he wasn't invincible. The hunters knew it too. They pressed closer, their boots thudding against the ash, their rifles reloading in a deadly rhythm. One of them broke from cover, charging down the street toward Kael's blind side. My breath seized. Kael didn't see him. My body moved before my fear caught up. I snatched a broken plank from the rubble, splinters digging into my palms, and stumbled into the open. The man sneered when he saw me, raising his gun, but I swung the wood with every ounce of desperation inside me. The crack against his head echoed like thunder. He collapsed, groaning, his weapon skittering across the dirt. My chest heaved, my arms shaking violently, but I stood my ground. Kael turned, eyes wide with something I'd never seen in him before, shock. "Elise," he barked, voice rough, but not with anger. With fear. The leader snarled, rallying the remaining men. "Grab the girl," he shouted, fury lacing every word. My blood chilled, but Kael moved faster than their threats. He surged forward, his revolver roaring twice, dropping two of the men in clouds of dust. Only the leader remained, his grin sharp, his eyes venomous. "You can't save her, Thorne," he spat, aiming straight at my chest. For a heartbeat, time stopped. I froze, breath trapped, heart slamming against my ribs. Kael's gun swung up, but the leader had the shot. The world narrowed to the black circle of that barrel, until my foot caught the fallen rifle at my side. I grabbed it clumsily, the wood heavy in my hands, the metal cold. I didn't know how to aim, didn't know how to breathe, but instinct screamed through me. I pulled the trigger. The blast kicked back hard, knocking me to the dirt. Smoke filled my lungs. When I blinked through the haze, the leader was on his knees, blood blooming across his shoulder. His gun slipped from his hand, clattering uselessly. My hands trembled violently, but the rifle still smoked in my grip. Kael stood frozen, staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time. The leader staggered, clutching his wound, his sneer curling even in defeat. "She's got more bite than you, Thorne," he wheezed. "Careful. She'll be the death of you." Kael's jaw clenched, and for once, he didn't pull the trigger. He let the man stumble away, blood trailing in the dust. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the echo of my ragged breaths. My hands still shook, the rifle slipping from my grip as I dropped it into the dirt. I had fired a gun. I had put a bullet into flesh. The weight of it pressed into my chest like a stone. Kael strode toward me, his steps quick, his face shadowed with something fierce. He grabbed my shoulders, his grip rough, shaking me once. "Are you out of your mind?" he growled, his voice a storm barely contained. My lips trembled, but I forced the words out. "I couldn't let you die." His grip loosened, his anger cracking, something raw flickering in his eyes. He looked at me like he wanted to scold me, to push me away, but couldn't. Instead, his hand slid from my shoulder to my cheek, trembling against my skin. "You're going to get yourself killed," he whispered. The words weren't harsh this time. They carried something else, fear. Fear not for himself, but for me. His hand lingered for only a breath before he pulled away, his face hardening again. "We need to move. More will come." He grabbed the reins of his horse, wincing at the wound on his shoulder. My throat tightened. "You're hurt." He shook his head. "It's nothing." But the blood soaking his shirt told another story. I wanted to press, to make him sit, to tear fabric into bandages, but I saw it in his eyes. The fight wasn't done. Copper Creek wasn't just ruins. It was a battlefield refusing to let him leave. I swallowed the knot in my throat and climbed onto the horse behind him, my arms wrapping around his waist. His muscles tensed beneath my touch, his breath ragged, but he didn't push me away. As we rode from the ruins, the wind whipping through the silence, one thought burned inside me. I wasn't the same girl who had followed him out of town. I had seen blood. I had pulled a trigger, and in Kael's silence, in his trembling hand against my cheek, I knew Our fates were now bound tighter than ever. We rode until the cliffs swallowed the horizon, Kael's body swaying with each step of the horse. His shirt was dark with blood, the fabric clinging to his back, but he didn't utter a word. The silence between us was thicker than smoke, broken only by his uneven breaths. I clung tighter, my arms pressed against the hard lines of his chest, every jolt of the horse reminding me that he was flesh, not stone. At last he pulled the reins, guiding us into a hollow cut into the rock. The cave was shallow but sheltered, its cool air a relief after the burning day. Kael slid off the horse with a grunt, nearly stumbling. My heart clenched. He could ignore the wound all he wanted, but I couldn't. "Sit," I said firmly. He shot me a glare sharp enough to slice stone, but his knees betrayed him, bending until he sank onto a rock. His hand pressed against his shoulder, blood seeping through his fingers. I knelt beside him, my pulse racing. I need to see it. For a moment, he didn't move. Then, with a sigh heavy as the desert itself, he peeled back the torn fabric and revealed the wound. The gash was deep, jagged where the bullet had torn through flesh. My stomach twisted, but I forced my hands to stay steady. I tore a strip from my skirt, the fabric ripping loud in the silence. Kael's eyes flicked to me, something unreadable in their depths, but he said nothing as I pressed the cloth against the wound. He hissed, his jaw clenching so hard I thought his teeth would crack. "You don't have to," he started, but I cut him off. "Yes, I do." My voice shook, not with fear, but with resolve. His skin burned under my touch, the heat of pain radiating into my palms. I tied the makeshift bandage tight, my fingers brushing the hard plane of his chest, the steady thrum of his heartbeat echoing against my skin. For a moment, the world shrank to just this, his breath hot against my cheek, his eyes locked onto mine. The space between us charged with something I didn't dare name. Then he looked away, his shoulders stiff. "You shouldn't be here," he muttered. The word stung, but I pressed harder on the cloth anyway, whispering back, "And yet I am." The silence that followed said more than either of us could. When the bleeding slowed, Kael leaned back against the rock, his face pale but his eyes still burning. I sat beside him, my hands trembling from everything I'd just done. "You killed today," he said suddenly, his voice low, heavy. My throat tightened. The rifle, the smoke, the man collapsing under my shot. The memory clawed at me, sharper now in the quiet than in the chaos. "I didn't mean to," I whispered. His eyes cut to mine, piercing. "Doesn't matter. Intentions don't stop bullets." Shame coiled in my chest, but before it swallowed me, he added, "But you saved me." The words caught me off guard. He said them like they hurt, like admitting it cost him something. I turned to him, my heart racing. "And you've saved me a dozen times already. Does that mean you regret it?" His lips twitched, not quite a smile, but not denial either. "Maybe," he muttered, though the softness in his voice betrayed him. The fire between us wasn't the blaze of Copper Creek. It was quieter, more dangerous. Because it wasn't just survival anymore. It was something deeper, something pulling us toward each other, even when every bullet in the world wanted to tear us apart. Night fell, the desert sky spilling with stars. We built a small fire at the cave's mouth, its glow casting our shadows long against the stone. Kael's wound pulled at him, but he moved with his usual controlled defiance, as though pain had no right to slow him. I watched him, the way the flames softened the hard lines of his face, the way silence settled on him like a second skin. "What was his name?" I asked quietly. His gaze flicked to me, sharp, almost warning. But then it softened, just slightly. "Elias," he said, his voice raw. The name hung in the air, fragile as glass. My chest ached. "Your son," I whispered. He nodded once, eyes fixed on the fire. I reached for his hand without thinking, my fingers brushing his scarred knuckles. For a moment, He didn't pull away. His hand was rough, calloused, but it curled slightly around mine, tentative, almost unwilling. We sat like that, our silence no longer empty but shared. When he finally pulled back, it wasn't harsh. It was careful, as though he feared breaking something neither of us could name. My heart raced, and I knew. I wasn't just chasing his truth anymore. I was part of it. The fire crackled, coyotes howling in the distance, and the desert seemed to breathe with us. Kael leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice low. This road doesn't end well, Elise. Men like me don't get peace. We get bullets or a noose. His words carved into me, sharp as any blade. But I shook my head, my voice steady. Maybe men like you don't. But maybe you don't have to be just a man like you anymore. He looked at me then, really looked, his eyes reflecting the fire, his pain, and something else, hope, fragile and dangerous. His lips parted like he wanted to speak, but the sound of distant hooves cut through the night. Kael stiffened instantly, his hand going to his revolver. My blood ran cold. He put a finger to his lips, motioning for silence. The hoofbeats grew louder, closer, echoing against the cliffs. Whoever they weren't wandering travelers. My chest tightened as I realized danger wasn't done with us. The fire between us had barely sparked, and already the world was trying to snuff it out. Kael rose to his feet, revolver gleaming in the firelight, his jaw set. They've found us. The hoofbeats echoed louder, clattering against the canyon walls like war drums. Kael's silhouette stood sharp against the firelight, his revolver drawn, his body a coil of readiness. My chest tightened, every instinct screaming to hide, but the cave's walls trapped us, leaving nowhere to vanish. Kael's hand gripped my arm suddenly, pulling me to my feet. His voice was low, urgent. We ride. Now! My pulse thundered as he shoved out the fire with his boot, plunging us into darkness. The night pressed close, heavy with silence except for the hunters closing in. I scrambled onto the horse behind him, clutching his waist, the warmth of his body grounding me against the rising panic. With a sharp kick, the horse bolted from the hollow, hooves striking sparks against stone. Wind tore through my hair, the desert stretching wide and merciless beneath the moon. Behind us, shouts erupted, rifles cracking, bullets splitting the air. Kael ducked low, urging the horse faster. I buried my face against his back, the smell of leather and smoke filling my lungs. The world narrowed to speed, to fear, to the certainty that if the horse stumbled once, we would both fall into the teeth of death. The riders chased hard, their torches blazing like angry stars across the dark. Kael twisted in the saddle, firing shots that cracked the night open. I gripped his belt with white knuckles, my body pressed against him as he reloaded with practiced speed. The horse's breath came harsh, hooves pounding the earth in a rhythm that matched my racing heart. A bullet screamed past my ear, so close it burned the air. I flinched, a gasp breaking from me. Kael's voice cut through the chaos. Hold tight. His words carried no fear, only command, but beneath them I heard it, the thin edge of desperation. He couldn't outrun them forever. The canyon split into two paths ahead, one wide and open under the moonlight, the other a jagged trail through blackened stone. Left or right? I shouted over the wind. Kael's eyes flicked once, calculating. Right. He yanked the reins, the horse veering sharply toward the narrow trail. Stones clattered down the cliffs as we plunged into the shadows, the path so tight I could feel rocks scraping my leg. Behind us, the riders cursed, their torches flickering as they struggled to follow. My breath caught. For the first time, the night felt like it belonged to us. The path twisted sharply, cliffs looming overhead, their jagged faces swallowing the moonlight. Kael guided the horse with skill born of survival, ducking low as branches clawed at us. My arms wrapped tighter around him, not just for balance, but to feel alive through his warmth. The hoofbeats of our pursuers echoed faint behind, but they hadn't given up. Their voices carried, mocking, promising death when they caught us. My stomach churned with fear, but when I looked at Kael, his jaw set, his eyes burning with defiance, I felt something else, strength. His wound pulled at him, blood staining his bandage fresh again, yet he never faltered. Every muscle in him screamed resistance. Suddenly, the trail narrowed into a sheer ledge overlooking a ravine, the ground crumbling beneath the horse's hooves. My breath caught, terror seizing me as Kael pulled hard on the reins. The horse reared, teetering on the edge. "We can't stay here," I cried, my voice breaking. Kael's eyes darted across the ravine, searching, calculating. Finally, he growled, "Hold on." Before I could protest, he spurred the horse forward. The world dropped away. We were flying, suspended over emptiness, chasing hope across the broken bones of the desert. The horse landed hard on the other side, its hooves skidding against loose stone. I screamed, clutching Kael as we nearly toppled into the ravine's maw. But somehow, impossibly, we held. Dust exploded around us, rocks tumbling into the abyss below. My heart thundered, my breath ragged, but Kael didn't slow. He spurred the horse onward, weaving through narrow paths, putting distance between us and the shouts that now sounded far behind. Minutes stretched into forever until, finally, silence swallowed the canyon. Only the horse's labored breaths and my racing pulse filled the night. Kael slowed, his body sagging slightly, the strain of blood loss catching him at last. I slid down first, rushing to steady him as he dismounted, his weight heavy in my arms. His skin burned with fever, his breath harsh. "Kael," I whispered, panic swelling in my chest. He pushed me away weakly, shaking his head. "I'm fine." But he wasn't. His strength was unraveling, thread by thread. I lowered him onto a patch of grass beneath a cliff overhang, my hands trembling as I pressed against his bandage. Blood soaked through, hot and relentless. Tears blurred my eyes, but I forced my voice steady. "You're not dying. Not here. Not tonight." Kael's eyes fluttered, heavy with exhaustion, but they locked onto mine with startling intensity. "Why are you still here?" he rasped, his voice a broken whisper. "You've seen what I am. You've seen the blood. Why stay?" The question tore at me, but the answer came fierce and certain. "Because you're not what they say. You're not just a gun or a shadow. You're the man who still remembers his son's name. The man who shielded me when no one else would. That's who I see." His breath caught, his lips parting as though the words struck deeper than any bullet. For a long moment, we sat in silence, the desert night wrapping around us like a shroud. Then his hand lifted weakly, trembling, and brushed against my cheek. The touch was light, almost uncertain, but it sent fire rushing through me. "Elise," he whispered, my name rough on his tongue, as though he hadn't spoken softness in years. I pressed my hand over his, holding it there, grounding him. "You don't have to face this alone anymore," I said. His eyes glistened in the moonlight, not with weakness, but with something fragile, something I knew was more dangerous than any gun. Hope. The morning came with no mercy. Sunlight cut across the cliffs, spilling over the ravine where we had collapsed. Kael stirred weakly, his face pale, his shirt stiff with dried blood. I had barely slept, my body trembling from fear and exhaustion, but there was no time left for rest. The sound of hooves returned, faint at first, then louder, rolling like thunder through the canyon. My chest tightened. They had found us. Kael pushed himself upright, grimacing, his revolver heavy in his hand. He looked like a man half dead, yet fire still flickered in his eyes. "They won't stop," he muttered, voice rough, determined. I touched his arm, panic clawing at my throat. "You can't fight them like this." His gaze cut to mine, sharp even through his weakness. "I don't have a choice." My stomach twisted. He was right. Running had bought us one night, but the world was done letting him slip away. Dust rose at the canyon's mouth, riders fanning out like a pack of wolves. Rifles glinted, shouts carried across the rock. Kael staggered to his feet, his shadow long against the sun. "Stay behind me," he growled. But I knew this time. I couldn't just hide in the shadows. The first shot cracked, sparking off stone near my head. I ducked, heart hammering, but Kael fired back instantly, his bullet dropping one of the riders before they could aim again. The canyon exploded with sound, gunfire ricocheting, horses screaming, dust choking the air. Kael moved with the precision of a man who had lived his whole life in battle, his revolver flashing like fire in his hands. But I saw the tremor in his arm, the wince when his wound pulled. He was burning out, piece by piece, and there were too many of them. I pressed against the rock, terror clawing at me, until my gaze fell on the rifle half buried in dust from last night. My blood turned to fire. Without thinking, I grabbed it, the wood heavy but familiar now. My breath shook, but I steadied it, Kael's words echoing in my head. Belief doesn't change bullets. My hands trembled, but I lifted the rifle, aiming at a rider who had Kael in his sights. The trigger burned against my finger as I pulled. The man tumbled from his saddle, crashing hard into the dust. Kael whipped his head toward me, eyes blazing. "Elise!" But his voice wasn't anger. It was survival. More riders stormed forward, their leader at the front, the same man I had shot the night before, his arm bandaged, his face twisted with rage. "Thorne," he bellowed. "This ends today." His rifle aimed at Kael, hatred burning like wildfire in his eyes. My chest seized as I saw Kael stagger, his revolver nearly empty, his body too weak to dodge. Without thought, I darted from cover, planting myself in front of him. "Elise!" Kael roared, his voice breaking. The leader sneered. "Move, girl. You don't die for him. He ain't worth it." My knees trembled, but I stood firm, gripping the rifle tight. "Maybe not to you," I shouted back, "but he's worth everything to me." The words tore from me like fire, filling the canyon with something louder than gunshots. For a split second, the world froze. Kael's breath caught, his eyes wide with something raw and unspoken. The leader's sneer widened. "Then you'll fall together." His finger tightened on the trigger. Time slowed. The dust swirled, the sun blazed, my heart thundered. Until Kael shoved me aside, his revolver blazing one final time. The shot split the air, striking the leader square in the chest. His body collapsed, dust swallowing him whole. Chaos erupted. The remaining riders fired wildly, fury spilling into desperation. Kael staggered but stood, his revolver empty now, his eyes blazing with a fire that refused to die. He drew his knife, charging forward with a snarl, his body moving like a storm unleashed. The fight turned brutal, steel against rifles, fists against fury. I fired again, clumsy but fierce, dropping another rider who aimed at Kael's back. The canyon rang with screams, dust, blood, and echoes of the past. When the final shot faded, silence crashed down heavy and merciless. Corpses littered the ground, their blood soaking into Copper Creek's bones. Kael stood in the center, chest heaving, knife dripping, his body trembling from exhaustion. My rifle slipped from my grasp as I ran to him, catching him before his knees gave out. His weight sagged against me, his breath ragged, his eyes glazed with pain. "It's over," I whispered, my voice trembling, tears blurring the carnage around us. His gaze lifted weakly, locking onto mine. "No," he rasped, "it's never over." But then his hand caught mine, tight, desperate, grounding him. Unless you're still here." My chest broke open. I held him tighter, whispering fiercely, "I'm not leaving. Not now. Not ever." We collapsed together against the canyon wall, the bodies of his enemies sprawled across the dust. My hands shook as I pressed them to his chest, feeling the steady thrum of life still clinging. His eyes fluttered shut, his breath ragged, but his grip on my hand never loosened. "Elise," he whispered, my name breaking on his tongue. "I told you, men like me don't get peace." I leaned closer, pressing my forehead against his, my tears hot on his skin. "Then we'll make our own peace," I said, fierce despite my trembling. "Even if it's just for one day, one breath, one heartbeat, we'll take it." His lips curved faintly, a ghost of a smile, before he coughed, blood speckling his lips. My heart clenched, terror gnawing. I tore another strip from my skirt, pressing it against his wound, refusing to let him go. The canyon was silent now, the echoes of death fading into the wind. But in that silence, something new stirred. Not fear, not blood, not shadows. Hope. Fragile, dangerous, but alive. As Kael's eyes flickered open once more, locking on mine, I knew this wasn't just his fight anymore. It was ours. And together, we might just survive it. Dawn broke slow and gentle, spilling gold across the canyon, soft where the night had been brutal. Smoke drifted from the last dying torches, curling into the sky as though even fire was too tired to fight anymore. Kael stirred in my arms, his body heavy but alive, his breaths shallow but steady. I brushed the hair from his forehead, my fingers trembling with the relief of finding him still here, still mine. The ground was littered with silence, the men who had hunted him gone to dust, their guns cold at last. My body ached, my hands blistered, but none of it mattered. What mattered was that he lived. He opened his eyes slowly, their dark depths dulled with pain, but lit with something I had never seen before, peace. "Still here," he rasped, his lips twitching faintly. My chest broke open with tears I couldn't hold back. "Still here," I echoed, clutching his hand tight. For the first time since I met him, the danger wasn't louder than the dawn. For the first time, I saw him not as a man hunted, not as the shadow the town feared, but as Kael, broken, scarred, and alive. And alive was enough. We buried the dead in shallow graves, the earth swallowing their violence, leaving only the silence of the cliffs. Kael moved slowly, his strength fractured, but he refused to sit idle. I worked beside him, my hands blistered, my arms weak, but it felt right to leave nothing rotting in Copper Creek's bones. When the last mound of dirt was smoothed, Kael stood over it, his jaw tight, his eyes heavy. "This place has taken enough," he said, his voice quiet but fierce. I slipped my hand into his, the gesture soft against the rough of his palm. "Then let it take no more." He looked at me, his eyes unreadable, then nodded once. For a long moment, we stood in the ruins, the ashes of his past at our feet. It felt like standing on the edge of two worlds, the one that had broken him and the one we might still choose. "We can't stay," Kael muttered at last. "This town is nothing but ghosts." I squeezed his hand. "Then let's leave together." His gaze searched mine, a flicker of something fragile passing across his face. And for the first time, he didn't push me away. He simply whispered, "Together." We rode out of Copper Creek as the sun climbed higher, painting the desert in hues of fire and gold. Kael's body swayed with the horse's rhythm, his wounds slowing him, but his back was straight, his head high. For once, he didn't look like a man fleeing. He looked like a man leaving the grave behind. The town on the horizon seemed impossibly far, and I wondered what would wait for us there. Fear, judgment, whispers that painted me a fool for standing beside him. But as I clung to him, my arms wrapped around his waist, I realized I didn't care. I had seen what the world refused to see. I had looked past the guns, past the shadow, past the blood, and found the man beneath it. "You'll regret this," Kael muttered suddenly, his voice low. "Walking this road with me. You'll lose more than you gain." I pressed my cheek against his back, the leather warm beneath the sun. "Then let me be the one to decide what's worth losing." His chest rose, a shaky breath breaking free. He didn't argue again. The desert wind carried us forward, and in that silence, I knew our story wasn't ending. It was beginning. The town stirred as we entered, eyes widening, whispers sparking like wildfire. Mothers pulled their children close. Men leaned on doorframes with suspicion hard in their faces. But I held my head high, riding behind Kael, my arms around him for the world to see. The sheriff stepped forward, his hand hovering near his badge, his eyes narrowing. "Thorne," he said, his tone heavy with warning. The air grew tight, every villager waiting for the clash. Kael straightened in the saddle, his eyes steady, but for once he didn't reach for his gun. "It's done," he said simply. His voice carried the weight of graves, of battles, of a man who had finally laid his demons in the dirt. The sheriff's jaw clenched, his gaze flicking to me. Judgment burned there, but also hesitation. At last, he stepped aside. The crowd parted, whispers rising, some angry, some fearful, some curious. I met their eyes, my chin high, and for once, I didn't feel small beneath their stares. I felt chosen, not by them, but by him. And that was enough. Kael's hand found mine briefly, a squeeze hidden from the crowd, but strong enough to steady me. Together, we rode past them, unbroken. That night, the town was quiet. No gunfire, no shouts, no hunters closing in. Just the stillness of a place that had judged too quickly, now left to wonder. Kael sat by the window of the small room we had taken above the inn, his silhouette etched in moonlight. I stood behind him, my hand resting on his shoulder, my heart heavy but certain. "They'll never forget what you've done," I whispered. His eyes stayed on the horizon. "Then let them remember. I can't change the blood on my hands." I leaned closer, pressing my lips softly against his temple. "No, but you can choose what you do with the hands that are left." His eyes closed, his body leaning into my touch, a breath escaping him like he'd been holding it for years. For the first time, he wasn't Kael the outlaw, Kael the dangerous shadow, Kael the gun. He was just Kael, the man who had lost, the man who had fought, the man who, somehow, had chosen me. My chest swelled with something fierce and unshakable. Love, not fragile, but forged in fire. As the night wrapped around us, I whispered the truth I had carried from the start. "I see you." And this time, he believed me.